The wedding dress was still warm when Jennifer Mason disappeared on October 14, 1989, in the farming community of Millfield, Ohio, population 1,247. Her special day had arrived with the kind of crisp autumn morning that makes Midwest Octobers legendary. Golden leaves swirling across Main Street as the 22-year-old bride prepared for what should have been the happiest moment of her life. At 10:47 a.m., Jennifer's maid of honor, Rebecca Patterson, had watched through the bridal suite window as Jennifer walked toward her white Honda Civic in the parking lot behind St. Mary's Catholic Church, her ivory silk gown trailing behind her like a river of dream. She was driving to Miller's photography studio for last-minute portraits before the 2 p.m. ceremony. What happened in the next 23 minutes would haunt Millfield for the next 34 years. Jennifer's fiancé, David Hutchinson, called the Hamilton County Sheriff's Department at 11:47 a.m., his voice breaking as he reported that his bride had simply vanished from a stretch of County Route 73 that offered no place to hide. The responding deputy found Jennifer's Honda sitting in the middle of the 2-lane road, engine running, driver's side door hanging open like a mouth frozen in surprise. Her wedding bouquet lay scattered across the asphalt, white roses and baby's breath crushed under the weight of an impossible mystery. The car showed no signs of mechanical failure. Jennifer's purse remained on the passenger seat, her wedding rings still nestled in their velvet box. The radio played softly, tuned to the easy listening station she preferred, and the heater ran at full blast to ward off the October chill. But Jennifer was gone, impossibly gone, leaving behind only a single clue that would torment investigators for decades: a torn piece of her wedding dress caught on the car's doorframe, stained with what appeared to be blood. Deputy Carl Morrison, a 15-year veteran of rural Ohio policing, had responded to countless domestic disputes and missing person reports, but standing beside Jennifer's abandoned Honda at noon on what should have been her wedding day, he felt something different in the autumn air. The silence felt wrong, as if the entire landscape was holding its breath. Jennifer's presence lingered everywhere. Her vanilla perfume still hung in the car's interior. Her lipstick mark remained on the coffee cup in the console. Her wedding shoes sat neatly placed on the passenger floor. Yet she had vanished from a straight stretch of country road with clear visibility in both directions. Morrison began what would become the most frustrating investigation of his career, not knowing that the truth lay buried deeper than the fallen leaves outside, waiting 34 years to surface in a revelation that would shatter everything this quiet farming community believed about trust, safety, and the people they thought they knew. Jennifer Mason had grown up in Millfield as the kind of young woman who made small towns proud. The daughter of Robert and Helen Mason, she'd been valedictorian of her high school class, homecoming queen, and the girl everyone expected to escape to bigger cities and brighter futures. Instead, she'd chosen to attend Ohio State's nursing program, returning home each weekend to help her father with the family hardware store, and her mother with the church choir that had been Jennifer's passion since childhood. At 22, Jennifer possessed the kind of natural beauty that didn't require effort. Auburn hair that caught sunlight like copper wire, green eyes that reflected her genuine kindness, and a smile that had convinced David Hutchinson to propose after just 8 months of dating. Their relationship had been the talk of Millfield, the kind of fairy tale romance that validated everyone's belief in true love and happy ending. David, 25, worked as a manager at the grain elevator that served as Millfield's primary industry. He'd moved to town 3 years earlier from Columbus, drawn by promises of rural tranquility and steady employment. His integration into the community had been seamless, helped considerably by his relationship with Jennifer, who served as his passport into Millfield's tightly knit social fabric. The couple had purchased a modest 2-bedroom house on Elm Street, spending evenings painting walls and planning a future that seemed as solid as the Ohio soil beneath their feet. The wedding preparations had consumed months of careful planning. St. Mary's Catholic Church, where Jennifer had been baptized and confirmed, would host the ceremony. Father Michael O'Brien, who had known Jennifer since childhood, would officiate. The reception was planned for the Millfield Community Center, the same venue where Jennifer had attended countless birthday parties and graduation celebrations. Every detail reflected the couple's desire to begin their marriage surrounded by the community that had shaped their values and dreams. October 14th had dawned with the kind of perfection that seemed ordained by Providence itself. The leaves had reached peak color, painting the countryside in shades of gold and crimson that would provide the perfect backdrop for wedding photographs. The weather forecast promised clear skies and comfortable temperatures, ideal conditions for the outdoor photos that Jennifer had specifically requested at Miller's photography studio. Helen Mason had awakened before sunrise, her maternal instincts driving her to ensure every detail met her daughter's expectations. She'd pressed Jennifer's wedding dress with the careful attention of a surgeon, arranged the bridal bouquet with flowers cut fresh from her own garden, and prepared the breakfast that Jennifer was too nervous to eat. The morning had proceeded according to the carefully orchestrated timeline that Helen had refined through weeks of planning, each moment designed to eliminate stress and maximize joy for her only daughter's special day. By 10:30 a.m., Jennifer had been transformed into the bride of her dreams. Rebecca Patterson, her best friend since elementary school, had applied Jennifer's makeup with the skill of a professional artist, while Helen had arranged her daughter's hair in the elegant updo that Jennifer had practiced for months. The ivory silk dress, purchased during a memorable shopping trip to Columbus, fit perfectly, its intricate beadwork catching the morning light that streamed through the church's stained glass windows. The decision for Jennifer to drive alone to the photography studio had been made weeks earlier, a practical choice that would allow David to handle last-minute preparations at the reception venue while Jennifer completed her bridal portraits. Miller's photography studio, located just 4 miles from the church along County Route 73, had been photographing Millfield weddings for over 2 decades. The drive was simple, straightforward, and familiar to Jennifer, who had traveled that road countless times throughout her life. When Jennifer kissed her mother goodbye at 10:45 a.m. and walked toward her Honda, Helen Mason felt the kind of maternal pride that comes from watching a daughter achieve everything she'd dreamed of. Through the church window, she watched Jennifer adjust her rearview mirror, check her lipstick one final time, and pull out of the parking lot with the careful driving that had characterized her personality since obtaining her license at 16. That was the last time anyone who loved Jennifer Mason would see her alive. County Route 73 stretched between St. Mary's Catholic Church and Miller's photography studio like a ribbon of asphalt, cutting through some of Ohio's most productive farmland. The road, constructed in 1967 to serve the agricultural communities scattered throughout Hamilton County, featured clear sight lines for over 2 miles in each direction, making it virtually impossible for vehicles to approach without being observed from considerable distances. On October 14, 1989, the route carried its typical Saturday morning traffic: farmers heading to town for supplies, families running weekend errands, and the occasional tourist drawn by Ohio's spectacular autumn foliage. The weather conditions were ideal for driving: clear skies, minimal wind, and perfect visibility that extended to the horizon in every direction. Tom Miller, owner of Miller's photography studio, had been expecting Jennifer's arrival since 10:30 a.m., when he'd begun setting up the lighting equipment and backdrops that would capture her bridal portraits. Miller, a 52-year-old professional photographer who had documented over 300 weddings during his career, understood the importance of these pre-ceremony photos in creating the perfect record of Jennifer's special day. When Jennifer failed to arrive by 11:15 a.m., Miller initially attributed her delay to the typical running behind that affected most brides. He'd learned through experience that wedding schedules rarely proceeded exactly as planned, and 15 minutes late seemed well within normal parameters. However, as 11:30 approached, Miller began to feel the first stirrings of concern that would soon transform into genuine alarm. At 11:35 a.m., Miller called St. Mary's Catholic Church, expecting to learn that Jennifer was running late or had encountered minor complications with her preparations. Father O'Brien answered the phone with the cheerful voice of a man anticipating a joyful afternoon, his mood immediately shifting when Miller explained that the bride hadn't arrived for her scheduled appointment. Father O'Brien's immediate call to the church, where Helen Mason was putting finishing touches on the floral arrangements, created the first ripple of anxiety in what should have been a perfect day. Helen's initial response reflected the practical mindset that had made her an effective mother and community organizer. Jennifer had probably stopped for gasoline or encountered minor car trouble that would delay her arrival by a few minutes. But as those minutes stretched toward an hour, Helen's maternal instincts began sounding alarms that she couldn't ignore. Jennifer was pathologically punctual, the kind of person who arrived early for appointments and called immediately if unexpected delays occurred. Her failure to appear at Miller's studio or to call with an explanation violated every behavioral pattern that had defined her personality since childhood. David Hutchinson received Helen's increasingly frantic phone calls at the Millfield Community Center, where he'd been arranging tables and chairs for the reception that was now just 3 hours away. His initial reaction mirrored Helen's practical assumption that Jennifer had encountered minor problems that would resolve themselves quickly. However, his decision to drive County Route 73 in search of his missing bride would transform a delayed photography session into a missing person investigation that would consume the next 3 decades. David's discovery of Jennifer's abandoned Honda at 11:43 a.m. marked the moment when concern transformed into terror. The sight of her wedding dress trailing from the open driver's door, her scattered bouquet, and the eerie normalcy of the car's continued operation created a scene that violated every expectation about how wedding days should unfold. Deputy Carl Morrison arrived at the scene within 12 minutes of David's 911 call, his patrol car's flashing lights creating a surreal contrast with the peaceful agricultural landscape that surrounded County Route 73. Morrison had responded to thousands of calls during his 15-year career, but the sight of an abandoned bridal car on a rural road triggered instincts that he'd developed through years of investigating the darker aspects of human behavior. The initial crime scene examination revealed details that would puzzle investigators for decades. Jennifer's Honda showed no signs of mechanical failure. The engine ran smoothly, all systems functioned normally, and the fuel tank remained nearly full. The car's position in the center of the roadway suggested either a sudden stop or deliberate placement, but the lack of skid marks indicated that Jennifer hadn't applied the brakes forcefully before abandoning the vehicle. The torn piece of wedding dress, caught on the doorframe, became the investigation's most significant piece of physical evidence. The fabric showed signs of having been pulled forcefully, and the dark stains that laboratory analysis would later confirm, as Jennifer's blood suggested that her disappearance had involved violence. However, the minimal amount of blood and the absence of additional evidence at the scene created more questions than answers about what had happened during those crucial minutes. Morrison's examination of the surrounding area revealed no footprints, tire tracks, or other physical evidence that might explain how Jennifer had left the scene. The October weather had been dry for over a week, creating ground conditions that should have preserved clear impressions of any activity around the abandoned vehicle. The absence of such evidence suggested either extraordinary care in concealing tracks or circumstances that investigators couldn't yet comprehend. The Hamilton County Sheriff's Department mobilized every available resource for what would become the largest missing person investigation in the county's history. Sheriff Patricia Wells, a 20-year veteran who had been elected on a platform of modernizing rural law enforcement, understood that Jennifer's disappearance represented both a personal tragedy and a test of her department's capabilities. Within 6 hours of Jennifer's disappearance, search teams had been organized to cover the agricultural and wooded areas surrounding County Route 73. Volunteers from throughout Hamilton County joined professional search and rescue units in a systematic grid search that would continue for 2 weeks. The effort represented the kind of community mobilization that small towns excel at, with churches providing meals for searchers, local businesses donating supplies, and families opening their homes to accommodate volunteers from neighboring counties. The search efforts were hampered by Ohio's challenging October terrain. Cornfields reached their full height, creating vast areas where visibility was limited to just a few feet in any direction. Wooded areas, thick with autumn undergrowth, required careful examination that consumed hours for each acre covered. Abandoned farm buildings, scattered throughout the rural landscape, provided countless locations where someone might conceal evidence or victims. Despite the massive volunteer effort and professional search techniques, no trace of Jennifer Mason was discovered during those initial 2 weeks. The absence of any physical evidence beyond her abandoned car and the torn wedding dress created a mystery that seemed to violate the basic laws of physics and logic that governed criminal investigations. The psychological impact of Jennifer's disappearance on the Millfield community revealed itself in ways that would persist for decades. Parents began driving their children to school instead of allowing them to walk. Women avoided traveling alone, particularly on rural roads. The trust that had characterized relationships within the tight-knit community began eroding as residents looked at neighbors and friends with new suspicion, wondering if someone they'd known for years might be capable of the unthinkable. David Hutchinson became the investigation's most obvious suspect, despite his apparent cooperation with law enforcement and his obvious grief over Jennifer's disappearance. Statistical reality dictated that intimate partners were responsible for the majority of violent crimes against women, and David's position as the last person to see Jennifer alive made him the natural focus of investigative attention. Sheriff Wells authorized extensive investigation into David's background, activities, and potential motives for harming his bride-to-be. The examination revealed a man whose life appeared to be an open book: steady employment, no criminal history, and relationships characterized by the stability that had drawn Jennifer to him in the first place. His alibi for the morning of October 14th was corroborated by multiple witnesses who had seen him at the community center preparing for the reception. Polygraph examinations conducted by state police experts indicated that David was being truthful about his lack of involvement in Jennifer's disappearance. However, the limitations of lie detector technology and the emotional trauma that David was experiencing made the results less conclusive than investigators hoped. The tests did eliminate the most obvious suspect from consideration, forcing the investigation to explore more complex possibilities. The second major suspect emerged from Jennifer's past rather than her present. Michael Torres, a classmate from nursing school who had developed what Jennifer's friends described as an unhealthy obsession with her, had been sending letters and making phone calls that became increasingly aggressive after Jennifer's engagement to David. Torres, who lived in Columbus and worked at Ohio State University Hospital, had access to information about Jennifer's activities through their mutual acquaintances in the nursing program. Investigation revealed that Torres had been seen in Millfield on 2 occasions during the month before Jennifer's wedding, unusual behavior for someone who claimed to have accepted her rejection of his romantic advances. His nursing background provided knowledge that could explain the minimal blood evidence at the scene, and his familiarity with Jennifer's personality and habits would have given him advantages in approaching her without raising immediate alarm. However, Torres's alibi for October 14th proved even stronger than David. Hospital records confirmed that he had been working a double shift from 6 p.m. on October 13th through 10 a.m. on October 14th, with multiple colleagues confirming his presence throughout that period. Security camera footage from the hospital parking garage showed his car remaining in the same space from his arrival on October 13th until his departure on October 14th at 10:17 a.m., making it physically impossible for him to have reached Millfield by the time Jennifer disappeared. The third suspect represented the kind of random predator that parents' nightmares are made of. Robert Bobby Jennings, a drifter with a history of violent crimes against women, had been working temporary construction jobs in Hamilton County during September and October 1989. His pattern of moving between rural communities, taking short-term employment, and disappearing after local crimes had drawn attention from law enforcement agencies across 3 states. Jennings's criminal history included 2 convictions for aggravated assault against women he didn't know, behavior that suggested the capability for the kind of random violence that might explain Jennifer's disappearance. His familiarity with rural areas and construction work provided knowledge that could account for the absence of physical evidence at the scene, and his transient lifestyle made tracking his activities extremely difficult. The investigation into Jennings consumed months of detective work that ultimately led to a dead end. While investigators couldn't definitively account for his whereabouts on October 14th, they also couldn't establish any connection between him and Jennifer Mason. His departure from Hamilton County in late October, approximately 2 weeks after Jennifer's disappearance, created suspicious timing but not actionable evidence. By December 1989, the active investigation had effectively stalled. Every lead had been pursued to its conclusion, every suspect had been eliminated or cleared, and every piece of physical evidence had been analyzed with the forensic techniques available at the time. Jennifer Mason had simply vanished, leaving behind a mystery that seemed designed to frustrate every attempt at rational explanation. The Mason family's response to the investigative dead end revealed the different ways that people process incomprehensible loss. Helen Mason channeled her grief into obsessive organization, converting Jennifer's childhood bedroom into an impromptu command center where she coordinated continued search efforts, maintained correspondence with potential witnesses, and preserved every piece of evidence that might someday prove relevant to finding her daughter. Robert Mason approached the crisis with the practical mindset that had made him successful in business, focusing on logistical aspects of the search and maintaining communication with law enforcement agencies throughout Ohio and neighboring states. His methodical personality found outlets in activities that felt productive even when they produced no results, providing structure for emotions that threatened to overwhelm his ability to function. David Hutchinson's grieving process proved more complicated and destructive. The combination of losing his bride and becoming the primary suspect in her disappearance created psychological trauma that would define the rest of his life. His decision to leave Millfield 6 months after Jennifer's disappearance, accepting a job transfer to Michigan, was interpreted by some residents as evidence of guilt rather than the desperate attempt to escape painful memories that it actually represented. The community's long-term response to Jennifer's disappearance revealed the fault lines that existed beneath Millfield's harmonious surface. Families who had been close for generations found themselves divided by different theories about what had happened and who might have been responsible. The annual memorial services that began on the first anniversary of Jennifer's disappearance became exercises in collective grief that highlighted the community's inability to achieve closure without answers. Father O'Brien's eulogy during the first memorial service articulated the spiritual crisis that Jennifer's disappearance had created for many residents. How could a loving God allow such incomprehensible tragedy to befall a young woman whose life embodied the values that their faith community held sacred? The theological questions raised by Jennifer's fate would challenge the congregation's beliefs for decades, with some members losing their faith entirely, while others found their devotion strengthened by the need to find meaning in meaningless suffering. The investigation's transition from active case to cold file occurred gradually rather than through any official decision. Resources were redirected to more recent crimes that offered better prospects for resolution, and Jennifer's file joined the growing collection of unsolved cases that represented law enforcement's limitations in the face of truly mysterious circumstances. Detective Sarah Martinez joined the Hamilton County Sheriff's Department in 2003, 14 years after Jennifer Mason's disappearance, with no intention of becoming obsessed with a cold case from before her law enforcement career began. Martinez had graduated from the police academy with the highest test scores in her class and earned a criminal justice degree that emphasized modern investigative techniques and forensic science applications. Her introduction to the Mason case occurred during a slow afternoon in February 2004, when she discovered Jennifer's file while organizing the evidence room that had become cluttered with decades of accumulated materials. The photographs of the abandoned bridal car and the torn wedding dress created an immediate emotional impact that surprised Martinez with its intensity, triggering the investigative instincts that had driven her career choice. Martinez spent her off-duty hours during the following months familiarizing herself with every aspect of Jennifer's case, reading witness statements, studying crime scene photographs, and reviewing the investigative reports that documented 15 years of frustrated efforts. Her fresh perspective, unburdened by the emotional investment that had consumed the original investigators, allowed her to approach the evidence with analytical objectivity that revealed patterns and possibilities that previous examinations had missed. The breakthrough that would eventually solve Jennifer's case began with Martinez's recognition that the 1989 investigation had been limited by the forensic technology available at the time. DNA analysis, which had been in its infancy when Jennifer disappeared, had evolved into a sophisticated science capable of extracting genetic profiles from minimal samples that earlier techniques couldn't process. Martinez's review of the physical evidence revealed several items that had never been submitted for DNA analysis, including the torn piece of wedding dress that had been preserved in the evidence room for 15 years. The bloodstains that had been confirmed as Jennifer's through less sophisticated testing in 1989 might also contain genetic material from her attacker if the fabric had been handled or if the violence had involved direct physical contact. The submission of evidence to the State Crime Laboratory for updated DNA analysis required bureaucratic navigation that tested Martinez's patience and persistence. Budget constraints and competing priorities meant that cold case evidence typically received low priority, and the process of obtaining authorization and funding consumed months of administrative effort that felt almost as frustrating as the original investigation. The DNA results, delivered to Martinez by phone on September 15, 2005, contained information that would transform the Mason case from unsolvable mystery to actionable investigation. The torn wedding dress fabric contained a mixed DNA profile that included Jennifer's blood and genetic material from an unknown male subject, whose DNA didn't match any of the original suspects who had provided voluntary samples during the 1989 investigation. More significantly, the unknown DNA profile was entered into CODIS, the FBI's combined DNA index system, which compared the genetic markers against millions of profiles from convicted criminals, missing persons, and unsolved cases throughout the United States. The database search that followed would take several weeks to complete, during which Martinez found herself experiencing the same obsessive anticipation that had characterized the original investigation. The CODIS match that arrived in Martinez's email inbox on October 11, 2005, just 3 days before the 16th anniversary of Jennifer's disappearance, contained a name that would shatter every assumption about the case: Thomas William Reynolds, a 58-year-old man who had been convicted of aggravated burglary in Indiana during 2003, and whose DNA had been entered into the database as part of that state's expanded genetic collection program. Reynolds had been living in Hamilton County, Ohio, in October 1989, working as a traveling appliance repairman whose territory included the rural communities surrounding Millfield. His criminal history revealed a pattern of property crimes that had escalated to include home invasions, where he encountered female victims, behavior that suggested the potential for more serious violent offenses that might never have been reported or solved. The investigation into Reynolds's activities and whereabouts during October 1989 revealed disturbing connections to Jennifer's case that extended far beyond the DNA evidence. Employment records showed that Reynolds had been scheduled to service appliances at 3 different locations in Hamilton County during the week of Jennifer's disappearance, including a repair call at Miller's photography studio on October 13th, the day before Jennifer's planned photo session. Reynolds's familiarity with County Route 73 and his knowledge of Jennifer's photography appointment created opportunity and planning that explained the precision of her abduction. His access to homes throughout the region, combined with his appliance repair skills, provided both intimate knowledge of the area's geography and technical expertise that could account for the absence of physical evidence at the crime scene. The arrest warrant for Thomas Reynolds was signed on November 2, 2005, culminating a 16-year investigation that had consumed careers and devastated a community's sense of security. Reynolds' apprehension at his apartment in Fort Wayne, Indiana, where he'd been living under his own name and working as a maintenance supervisor, reflected the calculated confidence of someone who believed his crime had been perfect enough to escape detection forever. Reynolds' interrogation revealed the methodical planning that had made Jennifer's abduction appear impossible to solve. He had observed her during his service call at Miller's photography studio, learning about her wedding plans and photography appointment through casual conversation with Tom Miller. His decision to intercept her on County Route 73 had been calculated to take advantage of the isolated location and his knowledge of her schedule and route. The confession that emerged during Reynolds' interrogation provided horrifying details about Jennifer's final hours that confirmed her family's worst fears, while finally offering the answers they had sought for 16 years. Reynolds described transporting Jennifer to an abandoned grain silo on property he had surveyed during his appliance repair work, a location remote enough to muffle sounds and conceal his activities from potential witnesses. Jennifer's remains were recovered from the grain silo on December 8, 2005, during a recovery operation that drew media attention from throughout Ohio and neighboring states. The forensic examination that followed would confirm Reynolds' confession, while providing additional evidence of the violence that had ended Jennifer's life just hours after she should have been exchanging wedding vows with David Hutchinson. The trial of Thomas Reynolds began on March 14, 2006, in the Hamilton County Courthouse, where overflow crowds required additional security measures to manage the public interest that Jennifer's case had generated. The proceedings revealed the full scope of Reynolds's criminal behavior, including evidence linking him to similar crimes in other states that had never been solved. Reynolds's conviction on charges of aggravated murder, kidnapping, and rape resulted in a death sentence that provided legal closure while failing to heal the emotional wounds that his crime had inflicted on the Mason family and the Millfield community. The execution, carried out 7 years later after exhausting the appeals process, marked the end of a legal journey that had consumed nearly 2 decades. Helen Mason lived long enough to witness Reynolds's conviction, but died in 2008, 3 years before his execution, having spent the final years of her life knowing what had happened to her daughter while continuing to struggle with questions about why such evil had targeted their family. Robert Mason attended Reynolds's execution, describing the experience as necessary but unsatisfying in providing the peace that he had hoped justice might deliver. David Hutchinson, who had remarried and built a new life in Michigan, returned to Ohio for Reynolds's trial, but avoided media interviews and public statements about the case that had defined his young adulthood. His presence in the courthouse during the sentencing phase provided a reminder of the dreams that Reynolds had destroyed and the future that had been lost when Jennifer disappeared from County Route 73. The resolution of Jennifer Mason's case provided answers that the Millfield community had sought for 16 years, but those answers revealed truths about human evil and random violence that challenged many residents' fundamental beliefs about safety and justice. The knowledge that Jennifer had been murdered by a stranger who selected her through casual observation during a routine service call highlighted the vulnerability that existed even in the most carefully ordered lives. Detective Martinez's success in solving the case earned recognition throughout Ohio law enforcement and established her reputation as an expert in cold case investigations. However, she described the experience as bittersweet, noting that solving Jennifer's murder couldn't restore the years of anguish that the Mason family had endured or repair the trust that the community had lost. The Jennifer Mason case became a teaching example in criminal justice programs throughout the Midwest, illustrating both the potential and limitations of forensic science in solving complex crimes. The 16-year delay between Jennifer's murder and Reynolds's conviction demonstrated how technological advances could provide solutions to cases that had seemed hopeless, while highlighting the importance of preserving evidence even when contemporary analysis techniques couldn't process it effectively. For those who knew Jennifer Mason, her story serves as a reminder that evil can emerge from the most ordinary circumstances and that the randomness of violence defies every attempt to create safety through careful planning and good intentions. The white roses and baby's breath that she had chosen for her wedding bouquet continue to bloom each October in the memorial garden that Millfield planted in her memory, a living testament to dreams that were destroyed by forces that no one could have anticipated or prevented. The case files that document Jennifer's disappearance and the investigation that followed remain in the Hamilton County Sheriff's Department archives, testament to the determination of law enforcement officers and family members who refused to accept that some questions would never receive answers. Her story continues to generate discussion among true crime enthusiasts and criminal justice professionals who study the intersection of modern forensic science and persistent investigation in resolving the most challenging cases. If you followed this investigation from the beginning, Jennifer Mason's case demonstrates that justice, when it finally arrives, often comes too late to heal the wounds that crimes against innocent people create, but it can provide the answers that families need to begin the long process of finding peace with incomprehensible loss.